Hi, I'm Shayla Schmidt and I'm doing my video on the bubonic plague. So what is the bubonic plague? It's one of three types of the plague that is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The other two types of the plague are septicemic and pneumonic. And this particular plague is vectored by infected fleas from small animals such as rats. Now, if you look at this flea right here in particular, it's the oriental rat flea, and its host is rats. And that black mass in that red circle right there is the Yersinia pestis. And so when the flea attempts to feed on an uninfected host, like when it bites the rat, um, the Yersinia pestis from the gut of the flea is regurgitated into the wound, which causes the infection. And the bacterium is harmless to the flea. And once established, the bacteria rapidly spreads to lymph nodes to multiply. So Yersinia pestis specifically is a gram-negative, non-motile, rod-shaped coccobacillus bacterium with no spores. It is facultative anaerobic organism that can infect humans via the oriental rat flea. The bubonic plague can progress to the lethal septicemic plague in some cases, and even the pneumonic plague. And as the disease progresses, the lymph nodes can hemorrhage and become swollen and necrotic. So this is a picture of the Yersinia pestis. It's kind of cool looking. So what are some symptoms? The bubonic plague is the most common form of these, and mainly you get swollen lymph nodes, or they're called buboes, and I have a picture of those on the next slide, so fair warning, if you have a weak stomach, they're not going to be pretty pictures. So the swollen lymph nodes usually develop during the first week after you're infected, and common places you get them would be the groin, the armpit, the neck, and they're about the size of a chicken egg, and they're tender and firm to touch. Other symptoms you get from the bubonic plague is like headache, fatigue, aches, fever, and chills, so kind of like the flu. And then if left untreated, this can progress to the septicemic plague, where the bacteria multiplies in your bloodstream, and you can have extreme weakness, fever, chills, bleeding from your mouth, nose, and rectum. And you can also have blackening and death of tissue, so like gangrene in your extremities, like your finger, toes, and your nose. I also have a picture of that, so once again, weak stomach, probably don't look at that. So this slide right here is a picture of the buboes, and this one particularly is in the groin region, and they look really gross. The next slide is the gangrene. So this particular person has gangrene in their fingertips, which was a common symptom of the septicemic plague. And if this is left untreated, this will progress to the pneumonic plague, which is a respiratory infection. It'll go to the lungs, and you can spread this from person to person. You get a cough, you have bloody mucus, difficulty breathing, nausea and vomiting, and this may cause respiratory failure and shock within 2 days of infection. So get that treated. And going to treatment, the most common thing is that you're going to be prescribed is antibiotics, and two forms of these are the doxycycline and the gentamicin. So these will help, but the sooner you get treatment, the better it's going to be, because like I said, if you leave the bubonic plague untreated, it's going to progress into further stages, and it's going to be a lot harder to fix it and get rid of it. So going into a little bit of history, the first pandemic is the plague of Justinia from 541 to 542. There's a little picture that I put up on the screen there of kind of just people being sick. And this basically occurred in the Eastern Roman Empire, specifically the Byzantine Empire, and it's named after the emperor who was infected but survived this plague through like extensive treatment. And the pandemic of this one resulted in the deaths of 25 to 50 million people, which is crazy. And the reason why this kind of became like a crazy thing is because a bunch of these port cities um, became infected because of the merchant ships that were coming in that had a bunch of infected rats with these fleas on them. And because of that deficit of like 25 million to 50 million people dying from this, that's like a 13 to 26% of the world's population at the time of the first outbreak of this, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. So the most common thing that most people think of when they think bubonic plague is like, oh, Black Death, right? So this is the second pandemic from 1340 to 1400s, and it hit killing about 1/3 of the European human population. And this was believed to have originated in China. And it got its name Black Death specifically because of the progression of the bubonic plague. It went to the septicemic and pneumonic, and a lot of people were getting gangrene in like their toes and their fingers and their noses. And so that's why it's referred to as Black Death. And another thing that I thought was kind of cool about this, well, not really cool because people dying, not cool, but interesting fact is that they had these things called plague doctors, which is this picture right here. And they look kind of funny. And the reason for that, the reason that they have like that beak nose is because back then they thought if you smelled it, like smelt the plague, that you would get the plague, which is kind of ridiculous in a sense. So they made an extra long beak on the mask where they would put like floral stuff and like herbs and spices to keep like the air that they were breathing smell quote unquote clean. So they thought that if they were smelling clean things that they wouldn't be able to get it. Another fact about these guys is that a lot of them weren't even like actual physicians. Like when the plague broke out, people were like, we need doctors to like help. So a bunch of people who like weren't even like actual doctors at the time took these jobs, and they didn't even really do much. They didn't like heal people per se. They more so just like recorded the deaths of these people and like how many people had it because there really wasn't much to be done at the time. And they also wouldn't like touch the patients. You can say like this doctor is like holding a cane right here, and they would like poke their patients and like move them to like look at them just to see like what was going on and stuff. So that's pretty interesting. And the next pandemic is the third pandemic. I guess they were like, this is too many pandemics, so we're not going to give it a name. This occurred starting from like 1855. When I was doing my research, it said like it wasn't officially cleared up till like the 1900s, but this is kind of like where it started. And this was believed to originated in China again, and it spread to like all inhabited continents like close to it, and it led to more than 12 million deaths in India and China, and specifically 10 million of that in India like alone, which is pretty crazy. And present day, most people don't think about present day, and I certainly haven't thought about it because, like, you don't think about people getting the plague at all anytime soon or anything like that. But when I was doing research, I learned that like this map is specifically from 1970 to 2018, and 80% of all the cases in the US were the bubonic plague. So that means like it was caught really, really early in stages, which is good. But something that kind of shocked me is that a lot of these cases were in like northern New Mexico, northern Arizona specifically, right here, which is like where I live. And like I have never heard about the plague being in this spot, but it was interesting to like read about it. And also California, Southern Oregon, and like really out west in like the rural areas out there was has been where like the most breakouts of this bubonic plague have been. All right, well, that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.